Yo, what's up, nerds? It's MTG Man, and I'm just going to be going down the commander ban list and trying to explain, with my experience, why everything is banned and/or why I think everything could be unbanned. Black Lotus will start off. Of course, this is banned. You sacrifice it, 0. Add 3 mana of any color. We have what is it? Jeweled Lotus or whatever. Not Jeweled Lotus. There's a Commander Lotus that helps you get out just your commander, and that thing's already busted. This would allow players to get way too far ahead, and then its price is just going to keep everybody else out of the format who can't afford it. Then again, we do have the duels, which are very expensive, but that doesn't keep people out of the game, which is an interesting point, but I'm not going to ponder it too much further. Next up is Mox Sapphire, Mox Jet, Mox Pearl, and I guess we're not gonna get all the Moxes today. But anywho, basically, Moxes are just better than lands. There's no, well, there still is reason to play a land, but you can play as many as you want on a turn. 0 mana artifacts that can tap for a mana of their respective colors. And then, again, I think it's possibly a price thing. I mean, they don't cost as much as duels, but they are very expensive and would probably gatekeep the format a little bit. However, I don't think they would be as busted as Black Lotus. Next up is Library of Alexandria. I don't understand why this is banned. So you can draw a card only if you have exactly 7 cards in your hand. I feel like you could play this, on your first turn, while you have 8, play it, go down to 7, tap it, draw a card. But other than that, what are the odds that you have exactly 7 cards in your hand? I mean, like, hands are kept pretty full in Commander, but I don't see this really being a problem. I mean, maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this card would be problematic. I think it could be unbanned. Next up is Chaos Orb. This card's a classic. You flip it from at least a foot onto the table, has to turn over at least once, and whenever it does, you destroy all non-token permanents it touches, then destroy Chaos Orb. So, it's really goofy. The ruling is goofy. Just, there's that old story of the one guy who apparently tore up his Chaos Orb so that it could hit as many things as possible. And, it's crazy. Wild. And it doesn't really fit in with the whole, I guess, the standards of what we consider an MTG game. It's also going to be odd because of how large a board a commander is, or a commander game is, so I don't really, it's just weird. I don't think it would really be busted if it was unbanned, but it doesn't really fit in with the design of Magic the Gathering as a whole, so I can see why it's banned. Next up is Time Volt. So 2 mana, enters tapped, doesn't untap during your untap step. If you would begin a turn while it's tapped, you may skip that turn and untap it, and then you can tap it to take an extra turn. This would easily be busted. There's so many ways to untap target permanent, untap artifact, whatever, to where this would just be infinite extra turns for 2 mana. I can absolutely see why this card's banned, because it just seems busted. Next up is Charizard, 2 white. Players play a Magic subgame using their libraries as their decks. Each player who doesn't win loses half their life rounded up. So this is obvious. It's just because a subgame would take so much longer. And I mean, a commander game can already take up to an hour, 2 hours if it's really bad. But having to play a second commander game inside that one commander game is just way too much. Next up is Falling Star. This is about the same thing as Chaos Orb. So you flip it, and then it deals 3 damage to each creature it lands on. Tap all lands it lands on. It it just doesn't really fit in with Magic as we know it currently, so I can see why this is banned. Next up is Tolarian Academy. Now, a lot of people say, okay, adding blue for each artifact you control is completely busted, adds way too much mana, way too fast. It's really good. However, I think if you're banning Tolarian Academy, you should ban Gaia's Cradle as well. Because I feel Gaia's Cradle is just as bad. If you don't know, Gaia's Cradle adds green for each creature. There's also Sarah's Sanctum that adds white for each enchantment. However, enchantments are a far lower power level than artifacts and creatures, because every deck has creatures. Almost every deck has a good number of ramp artifacts, or is an artifacts deck. Enchantments, there's maybe like one or two per deck, but Tolarian Academy is just way too strong. Next up is Recurring Nightmare. You can sacrifice a creature, return it to its owner's hand, then return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, I imagine there's some sort of infinite combo with this. This one I don't really understand, because I haven't really seen it in action. So let me know in the comments what the real problem with this is, because I'm imagining there's something going on past just what the card says. Raphaelos Llanowar Emissary is up next. It's 2 green, 2 and a white, tap for each force you control. This is the same as Tolarian Academy in that it's going to say you super far ahead. I mean, you play this as your commander. You go turn 1, forest, turn 2, forest, turn 2, Raphaelos, turn 3, play a forest. That's 6 mana on turn 3. It's absolutely busted how much mana this guy would add. And I can definitely see why it's banned. Also, he's hella goofy looking. I'm just gonna be real here. Next up, Karakas. You tap it, add white, tap it, return target legendary creature to its owner's hand. This is Commander. Having your legend constantly returned to your hand is going to be really annoying, or B, having an opponent who has a legend with a really strong ETB ability returning their legend to their hand is also going to be a problem. I think it's odd that this was recently reprinted in Lord of the Rings. I'm not really sure what other formats this sees play in. Maybe Legacy. But no, this is definitely worth its ban. It would be super annoying if this was unbanned. Next up is Emerald Aeon's Torn. I'm just going to say outright, I think this can be unbanned. So it's 15 mana, can't be countered. When you cast a spell, take an extra turn after this one. Flying from protection from spells that are 1 or more colors, Annihilator 6. When it is put into the graveyard from anywhere, its owner shuffles their library into their deck. I think the threats in Commander have gotten stronger. I think removal's gotten stronger. I think in general this card isn't as good as it used to be. The extra turn is a cast trigger, so you can't just cheat it out. Yeah, I think there's other cards in Commander that are way scarier than this card is, and I don't think it should be banned. Fast Bond is next. I think this should stay banned. It's 1 green. You may play any number of lands on each of your turns. Whenever you play a land, if it wasn't the first land you played this turn, it deals 1 damage to you. So you could play this turn 1, throw as many lands from your hand onto the battlefield, and I think that's just kind of broken. I mean, you do have things like, not 3 visits, Summer something or another. It's 1 and a green sorcery, allows you to play up to 3 additional lands this turn. Summer Bloom? I don't know. Which is somewhat similar to this card. However, the fact that you can do it each turn for as many lands as you have I do think this deserves to stay banned. Yawgmoth's Bargain for black black. Skip your draw step, pay one, draw a card. Yeah, this is. It's pretty clear why this is banned. This would allow you to get through your deck so easily. You would have so many cards in hand. This goes infinite with God, what's his name? He's one white, blue, black. He's a cephalid. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses one life. You gain one life. And he's a 3/4. Came out in New Capenna. He's an uncommon commander. Whatever. But it would go infinite with him. This would just allow you to draw way too much. It would allow you to finish off games. I mean, people hate ad nauseum, and this is 100% better. Next up is Paradox Engine. People were mad when this was banned, so it's 5. Whenever you cast a spell, untap all non-land permanents you control. They're like, oh, it's all non-land, so it's not really that bad. No. This card is broken, okay? I'm sorry. You're telling me that it's not that bad. Have you played against Urza Lord High Artificer, who's cheating out spells? Then, since he only used his artifacts to cast said spells, he's then untapping said artifact. Like, no, it's busted. This deck sucks to play against. This deserved to be banned. Because it just... People like to pretend that you can only add mana with lands. There are creatures that can add mana. There's artifacts that can add mana. Like, this is a horrible card to play against. It's so unfun. Turns drag out. I'm so glad this card is banned. Yeah. Next up is Gristlebrand. 4 black, 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 black. Flying lifelink, pay 7 life, draw 7 cards. I think this is again sort of like Yawgmoth's Bargain, where you're going to be paying 7, drawing 7, and it's going to be getting you through your deck too fast. You're going to have too many cards in hand. However, I do feel that removal has gone to that state in Commander where people are playing enough creature removal to remove Gristlebrand. And I think they also are going to have ways to finish you off if you're paying so much life with Gristlebrand. Like, I think if we're going to say that Necropotence is legal, I think Gristlebrand can be legal. And I know in a lot of other formats it's used as a reanimation target, but I think we have better targets as well. So I do feel Gristlebrand could possibly be unbanned. However, I think there would definitely need to be some testing, but it's definitely not as good as it used to be. Next up is Arrayos or Tommy Ascendant, 1 in a blue, flying 1/1, so it can be your commander. Once the 4th spell is cast on a turn, you can flip it, and then whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, counter that spell. So I would like to say this card is healthy, right? It's like, okay, so they can't counter your spells because their first spell is going to be countered too. However, it's not healthy like that because it's just their first spell on their turns as well. I think Commander as a format has ways to remove this now. I think it's not as good as it used to be. However, this does feel incredibly unfun, and I would say the banning is definitely reasonable. Next up is Biorhythm. 6 green, green. Each player's life total becomes equal to the number of creatures they control. So I know this can take players out of the game, and it can be cheated out. However, I think 8 mana as a finisher is fine. I mean, like, Tooth and Nail, I believe, is 9 or 10. So I think being able to pay 8 for Biorhythm is fine. I think it's like on curve for what it should be. And I think it would be another good finisher for green. I'm just saying, like, if Craterhoof is fine, I think Biorhythm should be fine. Because Craterhoof just ends games. Biorhythm, at least certain players are still going to be left at life. It's not going to be killing everybody unless you use it right after a board wipe. But if you do that, you also die. So next up is Iana's Shield of Emeria. So 6 white, 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 7/7 flying. Enters, choose a color. Your opponents can't cast spells the chosen color. So yeah, the reason this is banned is there are monocolored commanders. So you just say black, and that one black player is just out of the game entirely. Nothing they can do. And as much as I'd like to say, oh, the table will remove it to, stop it, really it's beneficial for the table that that player is just stuck out of the game because they can, keep advancing their board while that one player just can't. So I would say this is a fair banning. It's definitely an unfun card. I think there are ways to remove it. I don't think it's as good as it used to be, but I still don't think it should be unbanned. Prime Time, Primeval Titan, 4 green green, trample 6/6. When it enters or attacks, search for 2 land cards, put them onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. I would love to say that this card should be unbanned because I think it would really help gates as a strategy because I think gates are neat. But I do not believe, blah, but I do not believe this card could be unbanned. It's gonna ramp too fast and it's gonna let a certain player take the game out of control. So I'm gonna say no. Panoptic Mirror 5. So you pay X and exile an instant or sorcery with mana value X from your hand. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a card exiled with Panoptic Mirror. If you do, you may cast this card without paying its mana cost. So I think the problem here is you pay 6, exile like Karn's Temporal Sundering, and then you take infinite turns. So it is, I guess, like a 2-card infinite combo. I do think 11 mana total is a lot to put into it, but it does, in fact, win you the game. So I can see why this is banned, and I do not think it should be unbanned. Leovold, Emissary of Trest. Black, green, blue, 3/3. Each opponent can draw more than one card each turn. Each turn. And then whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability your opponent controls, you draw a card. Definitely worth banning, so it can be your commander, which is very strong. And then just locking your opponents from drawing more than one card is brutal. And I am glad I don't have to play against it. So, balance. Each player chooses a number of lands they control equal to the number of lands controlled by the player who controls the fewest lands, and they sacrifice the rest. Then players discard cards and sacrifice creatures the same way. I think an equalizer is an interesting concept in Commander. I mean, we have board wipes, we have wheels that, well, like Windfall, that brings everybody back to the same number of cards, the highest player, whatever. And I think equalizers are generally healthy for the game. However, I don't think balance would be healthy. It's just gonna drag everybody back. I think games would become a lot slower. And I don't think it would be good. It just doesn't seem fun either. Same concept is limited resources. So when it enters, each player chooses 5 lands they control and sacrifices the rest. And then players can't play lands as long as 10 or more lands are on the battlefield. So if you play this turn 1, you're the first player, right? You can have 3 lands total. Second player will have 3 lands. Third player will have 2 lands. Fourth player will have 2 lands. And it caps it. So basically, until anybody draws a removal spell for it, that's how the game is played. And that just sounds miserable. Capping everybody at a low land total, not fun. Next up is Tinker. So you sacrifice an artifact, search your library for an artifact, and put it onto the battlefield. Um, yeah, it's clear why this one's banned. Tutors are good enough, and being able to cheat out an artifact like this just by sacrificing another artifact. You could even sacrifice an artifact land if you're playing those. So, I mean, you sacrifice your Seed of the Synod for, like, you tap Seed of the Synod to cast a spell, sacrifice it, get out whatever big artifact threat. There are a lot of strong artifacts that are out, especially right now. Blightsteel Colossus comes to mind. Uh, Artifacts are just going to keep getting better, and there's so many huge artifacts that this could cheat out to where I don't think it'll ever be unbanned. Next up, Golos, Tireless Pilgrim. I was pissed when this guy was banned because I was using him for my 5-color shrines before the shrine commander came out. So he's 5. He's a 3/5. Enter, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. I think this would also be great as a Gates commander. Again, I think Gates are cool. But then you can pay 2 of the Mooburg, exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play them this turn without paying their mana cost. This is when the problems came in because, well, I guess he almost pays off his commander tax because you're getting a land out of him when he enters. Or you could get Ancient Tomb to completely pay off his commander tax. So even when he enters, an opponent removes him, you have him back next turn. But this exiling top 3, you can cast so much mana worth of spells. It can set you up for the rest of the game. And just in general, if you play him turn 5 for 5 mana, he searches for another land, then you have 6 mana, you just need 1 more land, and then you're activating his ability. So it comes off as pretty busted. I'm not entirely sure how he did at CEDH level, but I know for casual tables he was a bit of a menace. Next up is Sway of the Stars. 8 blue. Each player shuffles their hand, graveyard, and all permanents they control into the library. Draws 7 card. Each player's life total becomes 7. So Worldfire was unbanned, which was 7 red, and it was somewhat similar to this. I don't think this should be banned. I think it kind of restarts the game, which I think is why it's banned. It's kind of like that Charizard where it's going to make the game drag out longer. However, it does bring each player's life to 7, and it makes the game a lot quicker to end. I don't think it should be banned. I think it's just fine. There are better spells you can cheat out. There are better spells you can cast for 10 mana, so I don't see why this one would be the problem. Next up is Hull Breacher. 2 and a blue, flash. If an opponent would draw a card except the first one they draw in their draw step, you create a treasure. Again, shutting down draws. People really don't like that. I mean, drawing is what makes the format go round, so without that draw, decks aren't going anywhere and the game's going to slog on, but you're getting value the entire time. Again, I forgot to mention it with Leovold, but you can do things like Hull Breacher, then Windfall, so everybody discards their hand but can only draw 1, except for you. And then you create, 21 tokens for whatever cards people didn't draw, so it can definitely get out of hand and is just not fun to play against. Next up is Prophet of Krufix. 3 green-blue, untap all creatures and lands you control. During each player's untap step, you may cast creature spells as though they had flash. All this takes is like a Beast Whisper, so that you're drawing every time you cast a creature, and you just go off. I mean, Seedborn Muse is already good enough, and this is just a better Seedborn Muse, so I would say this card is definitely worth its banning. Um, Coalition victory is 3 Wooburg. You win the game if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color. I think this would definitely take some testing to tell, because on paper it really doesn't seem like it's that broken. It is 8 mana. The prerequisites are a little bit difficult. I think it would be more fair if it was like you had to control a basic mountain, basic swamp, whatever. But overall, I think 8 mana is pretty fair for the ability. Plus, you're gonna have to make sure your board is set up. So, I think this could be unbanned, but it would need to be tested first, because don't quote me on this. Don't quote me on any of this. Actually, I'm no expert. I've just played a lot of Commander. Next up is Sundering Titan. So when it enters or leaves, choose a land of each basic land type. Destroy those lands. Yeah, we hate mass land destruction. This just destroys. It destroys 10 lands for 8 mana over the course of it entering and being sacrificed. So I have no problems with Sundering Titan being banned. Good riddance. Next up is Channel. Until end of turn, you can pay 1 life, add colorless. Definitely worth the ban. You could cheat out Kozilek, Emrakul, whatever you wanted. Turn 1 or 2, because green really isn't that much of an asking. So yeah, this card would definitely be busted. I'm never unban this. Sylvan Primordialist next. 5 green 6/8 reach. When it enters, destroy target non-creature permanent each opponent controls, and then for each permanent destroyed this way, search your library for a forest, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. I think this is, I would say, still worth a ban. So 7 mana destroys 3 things you create, or you get 3 lands. I think it's definitely a good rate. It's going to set you up. It's going to set your opponents back. And then it does also destroy opponents' lands, which nobody likes, except for you who's playing it. But I would say this definitely deserves the ban. Next up is Flash. Put a creature from your hand on the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you pay its mana cost reduced by 2. It costs 1 in the blue. Yeah, you cheat out anything with a really good ETB. This card deserves to be banned, I would say. I guess I'll cheat out my Sundering Titan. It's stupid, because there's so many high mana value cards you can cheat with it. And half the time that sacrifice is also just going to be beneficial, because so many things have dice triggers that doesn't matter. Next up is Lutri the Spell Chaser. 1 blue-red, 3/2, Elemental Otter. Flash, when it enters the battlefield, copy target instant or sorcery you control. And then it can be your companion as long as each non-land card in your starting deck has a different name, which is basically just how Commander works. So any deck with blue and red would be running this. I think that's why it was banned. However, Companion has had an overhaul, so now you have to pay 3 to put it into your hand. It also, what's it called? I would say it would still be used in any deck that does happen to run blue and red. I think the way that we fix this is just banning it as a companion. Maybe you could put it in the 99, it could be your commander, something like that, but I think just banning it as a companion would be the way to go, because we do have other cards that do this, that can't be your companion, that are perfectly fine. Plus, Lutri's adorable, so, I wish I could play it in my decks. Next up is Trade Secrets. This used to be in Commander. It was even in a precon. 1 blue, target opponent draws 2 cards, then you draw up to 4. That opponent may repeat this process as many times as they like. Basically, you choose you and an opponent. Both of you draw your decks out. So either they say no, you're 4 cards up. They say yes, you probably win. Or if you can't win, they win. Like it sets 2 players up to win. Or to go into like a counterspell war. Um, you know, like, hey, I play Trade Secrets, okay? Then we both draw our entire decks. Oh, and then I'm gonna play Thassa's Oracle. Oh, well, I'll counterspell. Force of Will, Pact of Negation, just back and forth. I think that's more or less how a game would come to, and whoever has the least counterspells loses. Which I don't really like the idea of. I think this is definitely a fair ban. Gifts Ungiven. Search your library for up to 4 cards with different names and reveal them. Target opponent chooses 2 of them. Put the chosen cards in the graveyard and the rest to your hand. Problem with this is that there's a lot of ways to recur cards from graveyards to where it doesn't really matter. This is kind of just a tutor for 4. Like, seriously, because there are cards like Entomb or Buried Alive that are tutors just to put things in graveyards. And this tutors for 2 in graveyard, 2 in hand. So I see almost now no downsides with this card. Definitely deserves, well, I think it could possibly be unbanned. It would definitely see high level play. I think it could use some testing. But I'm not. This one's another I'm not really sure about. Upheaval, I'm very sure about. Of return all permanents to their owner's hands. I don't think this is busted. I think there are things like River's Rebuke that send all non-land permanents to hand. The fact that this affects you too can be a problem unless you like Teferi's protection, your stuff out of the way. I mean, there are things to get around it. I think it's definitely annoying. It sets the entire game back. Same Charizard thing where it more or less restarts the game. I think that's definitely why it's banned. I don't think it's overpowered, but I think it's boring. I think that's why it's banned. Braid's Cabal Minion. I think this is. I'm gonna take a similar approach to Lutri, where I don't think this should be able to be your commander, but I think it's fine in the 99. It's 2 black black at the beginning of each player's upkeep. That player sacrifices an artifact, creature, or land. So this card could be super annoying. And keeping your opponent's land total low if you force them to only have lands or like whatever. I've played against a person who rule zeroed it to be their commander, and it could be annoying sometimes. Sometimes you'd be like, oh, I just got this creature out, now I gotta sacrifice it unless I want to sacrifice a land. Or they'd board wipe, like Deadly Tempest, and then we'd have to sacrifice other stuff we didn't want to sacrifice, but it didn't overall become that much of a problem. It didn't keep us all behind on resources. And then they had to sacrifice their own stuff too, so it never ended up being a problem. However, I think people would probably have a fit if they saw it more as commanders, so I would say just like ban it as commander, unban it in the 99, and I think we're fine. Ancestral Recall, definitely banned. It's blue. Target player draws 3 cards. Yeah, this just deserves to be banned. It's good. Cleanse is banned because it's racist. Crusade, I believe, was also a racism thing. Invoke Prejudice, I'm pretty sure just depicts the KKK. Yeah, Jihad. Mox Emerald, there we go, there's the last Mox. Yep. And then the last card, Time Walk. Yeah, it's a extra turn, but you're only paying 2 mana. This deck, man, I'm tired and I'm sick. This card definitely deserves to be banned. Yeah, it's too good. So that's it. Bye.